Good morning, everyone. We're going to convene our program. If you could please take a seat and get your things together, we'll convene our program. Okay, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. My name is Gailmard. I'm the professor of political science here at Berkeley. I'm the faculty director of the Berkeley Liberty Initiative, one of the sponsors of this conference, chair of the UC System-Wide Academic Senate Committee on Academic Freedom. I'm delighted to welcome you to this important conference on free inquiry. The themes of this conference have been increasingly important in recent years. I started almost 10 years ago on the Berkeley Senate Committee on Academic Freedom. At that time, it was a fairly calm way to record Senate service in an interesting area. Well, it's been quite a change in the last 10 years, and many of us saw growing problems over that time frame. We saw insistence by academics and departments on orthodoxies within disciplines. Many of us saw that enforced orthodoxies violated the culture of free exchange within the university, and which the university so desperately needs, even though they often conformed with the procedures of faculty governance. Many of us saw it, and the public sees it too, and this rationalizes the cratering trust in higher education by the public. In response, some of our campuses have started to build organizations to defend the culture of open exchange. On this campus, we have the Berkeley Initiative for Free Inquiry, a faculty consortium led by Will Fithian from Berkeley Statistics and Chris Hoofnagel from Berkeley Law. We also have the Berkeley Liberty Initiative, which is a donor-supported center focused on open exchange of ideas, particularly in student-facing modes. These are valuable, important initiatives, and yet the threats to open exchange and free inquiry are expanding, not diminishing. So we must redouble our efforts to organize in defense of it, including to share perspectives and build networks across the UC system and across academia. This conference is an important effort to do that vital work. I want to thank the conference organizers, Smriti Mehta, the executive director of the Berkeley Liberty Initiative and the convener of the Berkeley chapter of the Heterodox Academy, Rick Sander of UCLA Law School, Stephen Brint of the Department of Sociology at UC Riverside, and all of our colleagues at the Berkeley Initiative for Free Inquiry and Berkeley Liberty Initiative who sponsored this. The organizers had the vision to conceive and design this conference, and Smriti did terrific work in pulling it together. Thank you for doing that. With that out of the way, I want to make one announcement, which is about parking. Right next to this building, there's a parking lot. That's not usually that exciting, but if you happen to park there, it could get dramatic because your car could get towed. We're not really sure, don't really know, but if you are parked there, it would be a good idea to investigate whether you should be. So that's all I know about that. With that, I want to introduce our speaker for official opening remarks, Provost Ben Hermalin. Ben is our Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost here at UC Berkeley, a position he's held since 2022. He's led our campus ably through challenging times and steadfastly supports free expression and open exchange on campus. Before entering senior campus administration, Ben was chair of the Berkeley Division of the Academic Senate and chair of the Budget Committee of the Berkeley Academic Senate. Administration is only his day job. He is a renowned economist, holds tenured appointments in both the Economics Department and the Haas School of Business, where he's the Thomas and Allison Schneider Distinguished Professor of Finance. He's a noted expert on corporate governance, leadership, and the economics of organization. He received his BA from Princeton University and holds a PhD in economics from MIT. With that, thank you, Ben, for being here.
thank you, Sean, for that gracious introduction. It's my great honor to offer some brief remarks to open the May Day Conference on Free Inquiry. I'd like to begin with a very old joke and then a quote, both of which I think are apropos of today's conference. The joke dates to the Cold War. A Russian and an American are talking. The Russian claims the Soviet Constitution guarantees many rights. The American is skeptical. He asks, does the Soviet Constitution guarantee freedom of speech? Da, replies the Russian. Soviet Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, just like American Constitution. Then the American asks, yes, but the American Constitution also guarantees freedom after speech. Does yours? And the quote I would wish to share is from Adlai Stevenson, who said, my definition of a free society is a society where it is safe to be unpopular. The joke and the quote speak to what is at issue today. Do we have the right to dissent? Because freedom of inquiry is rather meaningless if one is not free to report on what one's inquiries reveal. In particular, is one free to report on findings that go against mainstream views, that challenge the powerful, that can overturn orthodoxies? We are all free to gaze at the stars, but if we can't present evidence to overturn a geocentric view of the cosmos without fear of an inquisition, then the freedom to stargaze is of little value. Now, to be sure, unlike Galileo, we don't face inquisitions, or at least not inquisitions of that severity. We don't even risk the kind of punishments to which John Scopes was threatened for teaching evolution. At the same time, we have seen from left and right an increased intolerance for findings that challenge cherished beliefs. This intolerance manifests itself in cancel culture, nasty social media campaigns, and heckler vetoes, as well as threats to funding for research that has the potential to reveal inconvenient truths. So while no one risks being burned at the stake, sanctions exist, sanctions that can be imposed both by state and non-state actors. Ours is not, sadly, a society where it is totally safe to be unpopular, or even simply to opine on controversial matters of the day. And the situation is getting worse, not better. Given the many benefits that free inquiry provides society, benefits that are well known to all of you and that I therefore don't need to enumerate, why is free inquiry so challenged? You will hear from people today who've thought more about that question than I, so I will not presume to offer an answer. I will only note that this is a question of fundamental importance. Our ability to defend free inquiry is hampered if we don't know what drives its opponents. The next question is, how do we defend free inquiry? Again, you will hear from people more expert than I, so again, I will not offer a lengthy discourse. I will, though, say a few words. To my mind, the defense of free inquiry is a battle for hearts and minds. Such battles are battles of persuasion. As someone who has studied persuasion in my own research, as well as gained practical insights in my role as cat herder-in-chief, otherwise known as being the Provost, I will offer a few bits of advice. Be humble. Humility is more effective than bombast. Telling someone that they should support freedom of inquiry because you're the expert will get you nowhere. Stress the concrete benefits. How are we better due to the results of free inquiry than if free inquiry hadn't been tolerated? Note what history teaches us. Those societies that have not tolerated free inquiry and dissent have stagnated. The cultural and scholarly richness of early China, or early Islam, for instance, was lost once orthodoxy came to dominate and innovation stifled. Lastly, remind people of another lesson of history. No one is truly free when there are those given to using power to suppress the freedom of anyone. Let me emphasize that last point. None of us can expect our freedom of thought, inquiry, and expression to be respected if we ourselves do not respect those rights for everyone, even those with whom we disagree. While we will, of course, while we are not, of course, going to hire flat earthers into our geography department or creationists into our biology department and so forth, we must be open to a range of views in areas in which the truth can reasonably be debated. Moreover, we must be generous in defining can reasonably be debated. For example, as an economist, I know that economic theory allows for the possibility that a good could be so inferior that its demand curve slopes up. At the same time, my knowledge of the empirical evidence leads me to believe firmly that there are absolutely no goods that have upward sloping demand curves. Demand curves slope down. And if you've ever seen me give a lecture in an economics course, I say that a lot. Yet where I sent a paper that made claim to have identified a good with an upward sloping demand curve, I would review the paper with as open a mind as I could. We should all be willing to admit that we could be wrong. When I was 11 or 12, a teacher took me aside and said, "Ben, you clearly know a lot, yet in class discussions you're rather quiet. Why don't you speak more?" To which I replied, "I know what I know, but I don't know what the other children know, so it makes sense for me to listen rather than talk." Now, while with 50 years of added wisdom, I hope it's added wisdom, I can see some weaknesses to my response, I still think there was nonetheless something perceptive in it. We should seek to hear a diversity of opinions because hearing something other than what we know or believe is how we grow intellectually. And perhaps that is one of the most compelling reasons to embrace freedom of inquiry. The more others inquire, the more they will learn, and the more we will ultimately learn from them. And with those remarks, let me now introduce your keynote speaker. Stephen Brint is Distinguished Professor of Sociology and Public Policy at the University of California, Riverside, and Director of the Colleges and Universities 2000 Project. His studies of higher education have been funded for a quarter century by the National Science Foundation and 4 philanthropic foundations. He's the author of 4 and editor of 3 books and has published more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. I don't know when he sleeps. He has also written for the American Prospect, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Washington Post, among other publications. His most recent book, 2 Cheers for Higher Education, won honorable mention from the American Sociological Association's Pierre Bourdieu Award. The book was also the co-recipient of the Emory Elliott Book Prize. And it was named one of the top 10 books on higher education for 2019 by Forbes. He is an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Sociological Research Association. A native of Albuquerque, New Mexico, Steve Brint is a Golden Bear, having received his BA with highest honors from UC Berkeley. He also holds a PhD in sociology from Harvard University. And with that, I would welcome Stephen Brint to the stage. Thank you. I'm sorry, I have to run to my next gig, but it'll be a great speech.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Their comments are great. Okay, so it's
So, wait, let's see. So, there we go. Perfect. Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Well, I want to thank the Baxter Initiative for inviting me to kick off the conference today. I'm going to focus most of my remarks on what can be done given the unprecedented challenges that we face in universities. But I want to talk a bit about the Trump administration and about university leadership, the main protagonists of 2 of the panels today. So I'll start there. I want to start with the Trump administration. I'm probably not alone in feeling like a little more sympathy to diversity, equity, and inclusion policies after the attacks of the Trump administration, which have so often targeted racial and sexual minorities and feminist scholars. And I feel, in my view, that the excesses of DEI policies have led to some negative unintended consequences, which I'll talk about a little later. But in the big scheme of things, they seem more like a rash that flares occasionally compared to the body blows, the series of body blows the Trump administration has directed at universities in the last 100 days. As a refresher, this is a partial recall of what has happened under the Trump administration, paused research grant funding to the tune of $10 billion or so, sent a Dear Colleague letter to colleges and universities threatening federal funding for allowing race preferences, launched investigations at dozens of universities, reviewed research grants that investigate topics the administration does not approve of, capped indirect cost recovery at 15% in federal agencies, science agencies, detained students for First Amendment protected speech and attempted to deport international students and faculty who have participated in protests, revoked and then reinstituted thousands of international student visas, and fired nearly half of the employees of the Department of Education, and tried, of course, now is vowing to eliminate the department. You probably won't be able to see this, but this is this is a list of the words that the Trump administration is scrubbing websites and grants to make sure that they, accord with the administration. This list includes such red code words as accessible, belonging, community, equality of opportunity, men, women, people. So I think you can probably see that the arc of history bends towards justice, except when it doesn't. And so we have a very serious, issue before us with respect to the Trump administration. My studies of right-wing policymaking in the states suggest that what happens is there are dramatic events that trigger much larger efforts to put forward a policy agenda that goes way beyond those events. You'll recall Elise Stefanik at the anti-Semitism hearings using anti-Semitism as a kind of springboard, which then went much further. This is another example. You have the Black Lives Matter protests, some of which were violent, and there was property damage. That was the basis for an ALEC seminar, American Legislative Exchange Council seminar on the onslaught of critical race theory, model legislations put together by think tanks on the right. That model legislation disseminates out to the staff. Hello? Okay, hear me better now? Yeah, okay. Disseminates out to legislators and governors, and so the divisive concepts laws that ban certain kinds of teaching and frameworks have now passed in higher education in 10 states. Anti-DEI policies have passed in 13 states. It really goes beyond CRT. And in the federal government, we now see the same playbook at work, but now federalized. And so you have the anti-Semitism as the springboard, also, I guess, DEI. And the idea is just
make that word so toxic that it mobilizes people, and that provides an entree for far more extensive, in the case of the Trump administration, far more extensive policy changes. So the Heritage Foundation has used campus protests and others to talk about some of these things. Well, this is all brewing before on the right in the think tanks and American Foundation think tank and Heritage and Manhattan Institute and others. Here are some of the things that were being talked about well before the protests. Dismantling the Department of Education, rolling back Title IX, and eliminating references to gender and race in all legislation and regulations. Lot of talk about coming down hard on elite institutions. Jim Banks, who was then head of the Republican Study Group, is talking about launching investigations, and other people are talking about holding back funds from universities unless they comply. So all of this is brewing, and the springboard are the campus protests over Israel and Palestine. And there is a little bit of a question, I think, in people's minds. Why did they start with elite institutions, which after all have so much prestige and resources? And I think it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of feeling of resentment towards those institutions because they have in the past been a thorn in the side of Republicans and the first Trump administration. There's also the thought, I think, that if you humble the elites, others will fall in line. And then, of course, there's the old Willie Sutton rule. Why do you rob banks? He was asked, and he said, well, that's where the money is. And so I think that's part of the issue, too. But all of this does present the possibility of the fall of this plausible scenario for the future, where you have endowments taxed up to 21%. That's a policy that's being circulated and will come up in Congress. Many more research grants disrupted and closed. Top scholars, already we're seeing this, pursuing opportunities abroad. International students thinking of other places to go. More international students deported for exercising their First Amendment rights. Large reductions, ultimately, in scientific and scholarly contributions, which, of course, have been a mainstay of the competitiveness of our country. So we're facing a future is unknown. It could be that it won't happen that way. President Trump has shown indications of pulling back sometimes when he gets pushed back. But all of that could happen. And obviously, that's very troubling. I now want to talk a little bit about the university leadership. I think we can ask, should we criticize university leadership as contributing to the predicament that we find ourselves in? Sadly, I think the answer to that question is yes. And representation has been an issue in universities literally since the 1960s. And it's kind of ebbed and flowed. But shortly before the voters in California rejected affirmative action, you can see this quote from the sociologist Neil Smeltzer. The political forces in the nation are such that the march of diversification in universities will become an established fact, and with it, conflicts over legitimate culture cannot be expected to fade away. And there's legitimate concerns, I think, about issues of representation. You can see here the big gap between the student population, non-white student population, and the faculty population, which is non-white faculty population. This data is a little old, but I don't think it's very different now. You can also see the decline of white high school students and the increase in non-white students. That's continuing. We have, of course, a majority minority population in California and several other states now. So when we talk about the diversity era, which is, I think, now passing in universities, when we talk about it, I think we should recognize that there were some positive developments. You had an upsurge of very interesting scholarship on the experiences and history of minorities and women. You had outreach and mentoring programs that I think did increase equality of opportunity. So there's some things that happened that I think were beneficial to the university. On the other hand, I think that there also were some wrong turns here. And maybe the most important wrong turn was that as representation continued to lag, and I'll say that university administrators, it's not just representation they were worried about. A lot of them felt like there's been this ugly history in the United States around race, and we really need to do something about it. They also aligned with the California Democratic Party and other Democratic parties in blue states, so the coalition strategy was consistent. The checking of trends and disparities also fits the bureaucratic mode, and so it made it easy for the bureaucracy to incorporate. But what happened was there was a constant upping of the ante. As representation continued to lag, more and more programs and more intensity around this issue. You also saw, of course, the robust growth of DEI offices. And I think there is something of an administrative activist alliance that occurred in many of our universities, so that you had indirect support for a politics of suspicion towards whites and men, tacit support for this epistemology of oppressor-oppressed that was quite popular in some quarters of the universities. And so these were wrong turns, in my opinion, and have contributed, to where we are now. It's not the only thing. There are much larger forces at work of demographic change, economic insecurity, political deadlock. Those forces are more important, but there was a contribution here. And if anyone doubts that there was this effort to make diversity, equity, and inclusion co-equal with academic excellence, at least in the University of California and probably in other places as well, I would recommend that you read the book by Susan Carlson, who was a point person in University of California Office of the President as Vice Provost for Academic Personnel and Programs. Here are some things that she says in her book, The Art of Diversity. Superior intellectual attainment and contributions to equal opportunity and diversity are the two overriding expectations. That's a change. DEI is a core mission of the university, and faculty members who see it as peripheral that they're a problem. She organized seminars of faculty from all and staff from all of the campuses where they talked about microaggressions, implicit bias, but also white supremacy. You can look in her book. In 2014, there's discussions at UCOP about that. So here's a timeline of what happened in the University of California. And of course, we're the vanguard, I guess, in California, but many, many other universities followed a similar path. The regions start to focus on historically excluded populations in a statement in 2007. You have intolerance reporting forums. You have these roundtables that I mentioned in 2012, mandatory diversity statements 2014, first DEI administration 2014, contributions to diversity and or merit evaluations 2015, advancing faculty diversity initiatives to hire more people. And I think it's not just a socio-demographic. Part of the problem is that there was a demand also for ideological conformity in many of these searches. And I think that was a particular problem. And then you have equity advisors, requirements for diversity statements, and then the beginning of some pulling back in 2022, and of course this year there's the diversity statements are now eliminated. So tide is turning a bit. What you see in other like-minded institutions of higher education didn't take into account was that some of the actions they were taking were also feeding a very upset opposition. People on the right, people who watch Fox News, and those left out of the university's circle of concern. And now that has crystallized in a serious way with the second administration of Donald Trump. So I'm now going to turn to talk about what we can do given this unprecedented situation and the unprecedented challenges that we face, and I am going to focus on communication and repair. So I was at first kind of skeptical that university leaders would step up in opposition to the overreach of the Trump administration. I mean, after all, these university presidents they're managers, they're umpires, mediators. They don't like to rock too many boats. That could be dangerous. And they have a lot of resources to steward. So at the beginning, it wasn't surprising to me that Columbia capitulated. But all of that changed. On April 14th, my expectations changed, and actually it started a little before that. You had Princeton president Christopher Eisgruber and Michael Roth from Wesleyan saying they were not intending to comply. And then April 14th, after this very aggressive and extensive letter that went out to Harvard demanding that everything change at Harvard, Alan Garber said, we're not going to comply. And now we have seen a kind of snowball of that, of opposition. We've seen Rutgers organize Midwestern universities. We've seen UMass trying to organize land grants. We've seen letters with signatures from 400, 500 presidents indicating that they're going to resist government overreach. So it's changing. We'll see what happens. And clearly, for those who are quite concerned about the overreach of the Trump administration, it's going to take a lot more than universities. It's going to take others stepping forward, businesses, law firms, media organizations, protest in civil society, and ultimately voters at the ballot box if the administration's policies, or many of them that are the most egregious, are going to fail. But in the meantime, universities can do some things. And I'm going to talk about what I think they can do. Once funding is stabilized and secured, might not happen for a while, I think we've lost touch. I think many people don't anymore know the benefits that universities bring. And we need to have these leaders need to put together at least a little bit of their resources, pool them for a campaign that reacquaints the American public with what universities do that is beneficial and how important they are for economic competitiveness and societal well-being. The narrative is pretty negative right now, and I'll talk a little bit more about just how negative it is. But you get this drumbeat about how terrible universities are and how they're hotbeds of anti-Americanism and all of the things that you hear coming out of the media. And there's a tendency to just elevate an anecdote to make it stand for the whole. And I think all of us in this room know that universities do a tremendous amount of good, but that's being lost. And so we need to step forward and change the narrative. We have, obviously, a tremendous story to tell about research contributions, about social mobility contributions, about improvements in students' analytical and communications capacities, return on investment, and also about the centrality of free inquiry for all of those good things to happen. So I'm not going to dwell on this. All of you are aware of many of the research contributions of our universities, but I bet some of you don't know that UC scholars have invented metal sleeves for freeways so that they don't fall down in earthquakes, flame retardant clothing for firefighters, the barcode, the wetsuit. There's a lot of practical things in addition to things we're aware of about CRISPR and quantum computing and so forth. And so that story is obviously being lost in the hubbub about the terrible things of universities. Here's just a few other things, some graphs about mobility and return on investment and improvements in critical and analytical thinking for students who go to college. So we have got a tremendous story to tell that's not being told aggressively enough at this point. And we need a publicity campaign with top talent to go out there on the YouTube and social media and other media to tell that story repeatedly. One feature of this that needs to be a feature of it is the absolute essential contribution of free inquiry to everything that we do. It's impossible to have a real university, the creativity, the critical thinking, without free inquiry. And of course, the canonical case here is of Germany after 1932. Before 32, Germans are dominating the Nobel Prizes. U.S. is starting to catch up already, but after 32, with the emigres coming over and the people they train, especially, the U.S. vaults ahead and now is winning 70% of the Nobel Prizes. It's also the case that every single society that is doing important scientific work, and I would add scholarly work in social science, humanities as well, are places that have climates of at least relatively free inquiry. China's the exception, but it's only a partial exception because a lot of the people in China have been trained in places like the United States in that climate of free inquiry. And they have incentives to bring them back to China, but every other country on this graph is a free inquiry place. So conformity just doesn't work in universities. It doesn't create the kind of environment that is productive of research and also of teaching excellence and mentoring excellence. Everything that we do, I think, depends on it. Okay, the other thing, besides communicating and besides supporting the leaders who are standing up to overreach, is to address, this is the reform part, and this is the end of my remarks. We have things we have to repair. And this is how far public confidence in higher education has fallen in just a decade. And among Republicans, it's at 18%. But it's falling among Democrats as well. So it's clear that there's a big distrust out there in the public. And since we say that we're there to serve society, this is a problem. This is a big problem, and it's part of why we're in the dire straits. So these are the main sources of public displeasure, and I think we can do something about at least two of them. The third one, we can't accede to completely, or not. It's a problem, but we can do something about cost. We can do something about political bias, the perception of political bias. The issue of, should we be aligned with what employers want, that is something we can't accede to completely because utilitarianism is an impoverished aim. I mean, we should have people prepared for employment, but that's not all of it. It's by no means all of it. So let me just talk a little bit about what I think we can do in these areas and then wrap up. Cutting some of the costs in universities is consistent not only with the meat cleaver approach of the Trump administration, but also with this emerging agenda on the Democratic side of the abundance agenda, which a big part of that is trying to reduce regulatory burdens and trying to make government more efficient. This graph is of the different employment categories in the university, and you can see that people classified as senior management and senior professionals, staff people, are twice as large as the instructional faculty, and the staff is 9 times as large as the instructional faculty. We're down at 10,000, senior managers almost 20,000. Where are some places where we might be able to cut and therefore either put that money into better teaching, or I don't think we'll reduce tuition, honestly, but at least beef up what we do in other domains. There's a huge regulatory burden. for looking at international students, admissions, course curricula, IRB. My rough estimate, and don't hold me to it, is that the University of California spends $500 to $750 million in regulation, compliance with regulation. I think that we should be able to make a pact with the help of federal and state government that we're going to reduce that by 10 or 15% over several years. Democrats have often been interested in this, just as Republicans have been interested in it. It seems like it's possible to me. That's a huge amount of money that's going for regulation and compliance with regulation. Another place, I believe, and some of you may disagree with this, that we could look is student affairs, which is just a huge operation on most of our campuses. And it's also a site in which the sort of social justice ideology tends to be extremely intense. I think we could probably cut back in student affairs. They also defer students from thinking that the main purpose of education is actually education. So these are the folks that give tours and run campus events and are resident assistants in dorms and so forth. And at the very least, what needs to happen is they need to be oriented that the main values at the university are academic excellence, intellectual or viewpoint diversity, constructive disagreement. They're getting none of that now. New faculty and graduate students could use that kind of onboarding as well. I don't think they're getting it. So I think there are places that we can pull back, and I think the public would like that. And I don't think it would hurt us. I mean, some of these functions obviously are very important, and you have to do serious study to find out where cuts can be made, but they can be made. With respect to political bias, again, I do not like the chainsaw or meat cleaver approach of the Trump administration. I think that's a terrible way. That's a terrible way to go about things. But I do think, since we are unclear about the benefits of some of these programs, and we feel that they may have unintended negative consequences, we ought to do a serious study of benefits and costs. And those costs could be to the climate of free expression, to creating alienation among some population groups. And the benefits, would be, do people from all groups feel more connected to the university? Is there positive improvements in the representation that doesn't come at the expense of other values? We have to, I think, go back to the main mission of the University of California, which is about the discovery and dissemination of knowledge. That changed. This is the 74 statement the regents made and then seemed to forget. We have to go back to that, but we also need to have robust equality of opportunity, because there is still discrimination in our society. We need outreach, we need mentoring, we need programs that make people feel welcome on campus and supported. Okay, last thing, can we align with employers? Not completely. We should make sure that our students are well prepared for the labor market, yes, but the aims of education are much broader than that. We have to help people learn how to think well and how to have good judgment, and that requires challenging intellectual work, challenging texts, challenging problems to solve. And so, yes, let's help people be well prepared, but let's also communicate the broader aims of education. And for those faculty who are not currently helping students expand, but are rather narrowing their capacities, let's try to elicit better teaching from those folks. Okay, so what is to be done? Support, organize and support those who are standing up against government overreach. Communicate what universities are doing well, the importance of them to our society and to our economic competitiveness. Reform what needs to be reformed. And, make sure that we use our own freedoms well and practice them. So it's a time for universities to organize for collective action, to communicate what they do well, to repair what they don't do well, and to face the unprecedented challenges of our time with resolve and resilience. Thank you.
Okay, so we have just a few minutes for our Q&A. So if you have questions, you can just raise your hand.
I see a hand out there.
So I will read to you just a very tiny passage from the Harvard president's letter, actually, in response to Trump. Jeopardizes the prospects of children to survive cancer, battlefields, our soldiers on the battlefield, infectious disease, global technological advances, risking America's position as a global leader in innovation. I also noticed a slide that you put up about what's great about the university. There's something very interesting there. I don't see any humanities or social sciences. I mean, you kind of tried to repair this in one of your subsequent comments, but what do you think is going to happen in this? I mean, if everybody's arguing about the greatness of the university, speaking very specifically about technology. I mean, I'm an engineer, by the way. I'm perfectly fine with that, but what do you think is going to happen in the humanities and social sciences?
Well, I think the humanities and social sciences make many contributions too, and they don't get as much attention, but we have had tremendous contributions in social science, the field I know best, transaction cost economics, psychology of happiness, predictions of the fall of empires. They just go on and on. Things that social scientists have contributed, humanists too. And I think we have to, see that these splashy things that we can put on our websites are only part of the experience. For many students, studying a poem in a dark room changes their lives and gives them a new perception about their world or themselves, and you can't really get that through a chat bot. So the humanities have made many contributions. Michelle Saltzman is here. She's a historian of ancient Rome, and she has an entirely new theory about why Rome fell, which has changed our way of thinking. And so that's just one example of many. I do think there's a possibility that the humanities, and to a lesser degree the social sciences, will be more under attack, but we should defend them. They make valuable contributions to improving the way people think and can write, their judgment, and also they make important research contributions. So I'm ready to go to the barricades for social science and humanities also. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Susanne Lohmann from UCLA. So I have two comments. One is you spoke of a publicity campaign. Of course, if marketing people, or think of the university, it has students for 4 years and we are teaching them daily, right? Why wouldn't the quote-unquote marketing campaign be with our students? If we were teaching better, then the students would then go out in society and think that the university is actually doing something, right? So it seems like that's the way to go. And this is, so I teach a lot of undergraduate students, and I've found over and over again that students say, oh, I have this dream college, UCLA, but then when they're actually there, the teaching is actually quite disappointing. Or community college students come, and then once again they are disappointed. And there's sort of a little bit of a tendency, like in the old Soviet Union, when, what was it again, we pretend to pay them, they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. There's sort of a sense in which we pretend to teach them, and they pretend to learn. So I think there are some real problems in the education enterprise. And the other thing is that when you were showing all this STEM stuff, but this point here that what are the social sciences and humanities contributing? Well, I think to a disproportionate degree, we are contributing students who go out into society, right? So our thing is also research, but I think primarily actually the training of undergraduate students. And so if we're weak on that, then that might be part of our problem. And then the other point I want to make is that free inquiry is not just about research and teaching, but also about university governance. And the Perry Link case is an example where someone was on a committee contributing a university governance argument and then got slammed for it. And so I think we need to say that in the university we have, on the one hand, university administrations that are focused on legal liability, and then they want to prevent people from saying certain things on recruiting committees or in other kinds of consultations because that might create legal liability. But I think we really need to also say free inquiry is about university governance, not just research and teaching.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. So I'm an empirical social scientist. I'd like to see more of the facts about how bad a job, as you say, we're doing in the classroom. I think there's a lot of variation there. I think it's a two-way street also. Students aren't probably reading as much as they used to, so we have to find a way to make that happen through maybe even daily quizzes. But yeah, we could be doing a much better job on teaching, I'm sure. And there's excellent work out there about what practices are good for teaching. There's a great article by Carl Wyman and Sarah Gilbert about what makes a difference in student learning. And so there is a literature there. I guess part of the issue would be to try to help our colleagues draw on it. And where the teaching is not good, we need to give them feedback. And I'm afraid that we have work to do there. I agree with that. So I'll just leave it at that because I know we have the next panel, right? So
thank you, Professor Brint. If you have not read Professor Brint's essay, Is the University of California Drifting Towards Conformism? I strongly recommend you do so. It's in the Center for Studies in Higher Education website. I'm Chris Hufnagel.